I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I'm Ben Detrick. Jordan Redaelli remains on vacation. Andrew Kuo still takes no days off. Andrew, how are you?
Good, man. Should we let the listeners know we're reformatting this pod moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no basketball, and everything else is just coronavirus, so we've decided that for this hiatus, we're going to be a little bit of a rewatch program. You know, there's a lot of popularity these days, and considering Andrew's love of whist, it made sense to look to our past to define our future.
Yeah, there's a lot of great shows in the history of shows to rewatch, like Lost, Ray Donovan season 7, Secession, Westworld 2, more Westworlds. Where did we land, man?
After some careful consideration, we're going to go with Criminal Intent.
Yes, nice.
Season 9. And we're going to start with episode 1. And it was called Loyalty. It's a 2-part episode. And
so it's a Law and Order show. If you don't know, Criminal Intent is one of the brands under the umbrella of one of the greatest procedurals of all time.
And what makes this episode, and perhaps this season, so critical in the Criminal Intent Law and Order extended universe is that it was the end of the D'Onofrio era. You know, Detective Goran. He was an eccentric chap, one who used powers of observation and psychological intuitiveness to solve homicides and other major crimes.
Peculiar. He was very Mulder. He was Mulder and Kirk, right? He was the id.
And he had a very interesting relationship with his mother. And it was kind of a codependency. But again, this was a marked change in the franchise because after a Somalian pirate guns down a wealthy sheik, we see new characters emerge in season 9. Mm-hmm. Namely, Jeff Goldblum as Detective Nichols.
Huge. That's a hard-ass name, man. What if you had a friend named Nichols and you were getting bullied? Be like, yo, this guy knows Nichols. It's like, oh, don't mess with him. Is there a harder name than Nichols?
That name would certainly ring bells down in Dime Square.
I mean,
Detective Nichols has showed up in Dime Square wearing a new Quarter Snacks hoodie.
These are very 90s ass like framings, right? Like, I like Detective Nichols. I like the Loyalty Part 1 sounds like a Mobb Deep album. That comes before Loyalty Part 2.
Yeah, that was the second episode.
That's right.
Continuation of Loyalty Part 1. I guess for you, looking back, how did Criminal Intent Season 9 affect your life as a viewer?
Well, it was, if we could, since this is a basketball podcast, it was like a changing of the guard. They were kind of going through a process, maybe, of these legends kind of mentoring these young bucks like Jeff Goldblum, Nichols, to take the helm of the Criminal Intent franchise. And it was a transition, and it was a turning point in the show.
Another turning point is me feeling like I probably got corona today.
Man, what are you talking about?
I think I got the Roni.
You got the Rona?
I don't feel it. Like my temperature is not raised and I don't sense the symptoms of the Rona. But because I went to the supermarket, I feel like I tied myself to the train tracks in front of the Rona locomotive.
Things got very real and scary, and we knew this was coming, right? Like even last week we talked about it. And now that it's here, it's as scary as we thought it would be. But what happened at the supermarket?
And that's all we're going to talk about. Criminal Intent Season 9, probably forever. And when I say probably, I mean definitely.
Wait, who is the Detective Nichols of the NBA? Really quick.
Donovan Mitchell.
Done. We did it. We did it. Shout out to Greg Ostertag, who was also in the running.
He did a great job as well.
He's a Shaq Slayer.
But yeah, no, the trips to the supermarket, as mentioned a couple episodes ago, whatever, those have become the most harrowing moments of this entire situation. You're talking about it becoming scary. I don't feel as if it's any scarier now than it was 3 days ago, but the dread of going to the supermarket and knowing that there are more people infected, maybe, or just that it's the stamina required to just keep going to the supermarket and washing off all your shit. And what's your process when you go to the supermarket? Like, what are you doing in there when you're guiltily getting ice cream?
It's tough because I try to take a straight line to everything, but invariably there's going to be people there, and I don't want to, like, and it's changing by the day, but I don't want to seem like I'm scared of, like, human beings. Like, these are people I care about, like, as a whole. I don't want to alienate somebody or hurt someone's feelings in a social situation, but at the same time, like, the best thing you can do is to be careful for yourself, and that helps everybody. So it's a real kind of, like, awful experience, to be honest. And
we all get that. I'm saying, tell me the nuts and bolts. How are you taking precautions when you're going to the supermarket? Like,
no gloves, no mask yet. I think I'm gonna start the mask today. I have, like, a dust mask from a studio. I do what I do. I go home and I wash my hands, take off my clothes, change into my inside clothes. I have a pile of outside clothes that I try not to touch, and just wash down, kind of wash up to my elbows and hope for the best.
Yeah, that's the hassle to me. It's like being in the supermarket itself and being around people isn't that stressful. It's just trying to mentally catalog what you've touched and, like, getting back to your house and saying, like, all right, well, I touched my keys after I touched something in the store, so the keys have to go there. Then I touched the door handle, and then, all right, I've got this tote bag, which I touched with my hands, and then all the stuff in the tote bag has been touched by me and the cashier and other people, so that's got to go in the sink, and I'm just going to, like, run hot water and soap on everything, and this is in cardboard, so I'm going to rip it open, and then, like,
yeah,
it's fucking exhausting.
It's exhausting. I have a grocery bag that I bring, a Cookies Hoops grocery bag. Almost sold out on cookieshoops.com. But I love it. It fits a lot of stuff that I need, and my cat loves to jump in it. So I'll bring it back from a supermarket run, and my cat will jump in it. And I'm realizing that my cat is probably, like, brushing up against a handle that I was carrying out there. It messes with my brain. And
yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about. These sort of contact highs, if you will, where you're like, okay, my hand touched this and the bag touched that, and then this fruit. I'm like, what do I do with onions and garlic?
Yeah.
I can't wash them because I don't want to have wet garlic, but someone could have touched them. Do I peel them? Like, what do I do? Or do I let it sit for several days, or do I peel it and then wash my hands? Like, I don't even know what to do.
I've been washing boxes, like pasta boxes and jars, with just like a soapy sponge. Because you just see people pick it up and put it down, like regular shopping. Human beings acting like humans.
And I even did that today inadvertently. I picked up a lemon, kind of squeezed it, didn't like it, and put it back down. I was like, oh shit, like, I shouldn't be doing that. Like, I'm touching more stuff than is necessary.
Yeah.
And, like, we're all doing that.
Yeah.
It's instinctual to pick up a lemon and kind of give it a little squeeze.
Yeah. Well, like, it's like your boy Sochi during these press conferences, like, touching his face and tapping people on the shoulder. He's like, come on, man. Like, yes, we have to take precautions, and I shouldn't have done that. And he's the scientist, and I like him quite a bit. But he's like, human beings have to change, and we change, like, slowly sometimes. And yes, I tapped him on the shoulder when I shouldn't have,
And I'm going to really avoid revisiting our whole conversation about going outside. But I do think a key element that we both ignored was that you live in a place that's far more dense in terms of businesses and people. And I get those same vibes of like, I need to get out of here when I'm up by like a main, commercial strip where there's people around. If I'm walking over in an industrial area by the water, there's just no one there. And I do feel the weirdest when I'm in the supermarket and like leaving there and around people. And if you are in downtown New York and you're around Canal Street or Houston or, First Avenue, there's no escaping people.
Yeah. Yeah, I live in a pretty densely packed area. It's hard to tell what to do, and human beings have to gauge everything as they go. And it's so funny, you bring up the supermarket as this is where it's going to go down, right? Like, this is where all the action is.
It's the spot.
Yeah.
It's the club.
It is. It is the corner spot. It's the trap house. But this is going to, the way we do interact, doing things that we need to do, like buying food, is going to dictate how this thing moves forward. And our behavior is going to change by the hour. But I feel for my grocery lady who sits there and everyone walks up to her and she's 3 feet from them. I worry about people I haven't worried about before, and that's a weird place to be.
I've started doing calculus about which supermarkets seem to be populated by both staff and clientele that are more diligent.
This is dark.
Okay, exactly. Like, I don't, the Associated is just a lot more crowded. It's bigger. They have more staff. It's more of a numbers game.
Yeah.
And then, you've got Key Food. You're like, that's okay, but like, I don't know. It's got a lot of people coming in and out of there all day. Like, I want to go to somewhere that's like low foot traffic, still has the stuff you want, using some fairly solid distancing techniques within the place. Like, none of us know anything.
I went to Whole Foods maybe last week, maybe this weekend, and there was a line waiting to get in, and we were spaced out 6 feet where everyone was being chill, and there was only, I don't know, I'm guessing like 20 people in the whole place on Houston, and there was space, and people were behaving like with respect and shopping. As soon as you get to the line, and then all the worst parts of everybody, including myself, definitely comes out when we have to wait in a line. It's like, is it my turn or your turn? They had like the lanes kind of 4 lanes meld into 2, so people are like, well, technically I'm next because of this reason. I'm like, well, we haven't talked about this, so I think I'm next, and I just lost my patience, and I realized how close I am to like not keeping it together a little bit.
Yeah, for me, where I think I acquired the Roni today, if I did acquire Roni, was that I wanted to get coffee beans because I've started making coffee from home. We've talked about the coffee calculus and using it to start your day. So being incredibly careful with everything else, I went and got coffee beans to grind, and the person uses a scoop and, puts them into a bag for you. So I get home and I like scissor open the bag and dump it into an, untarnished, uncontaminated plastic Ziploc, seal it up, then make some coffee. As I'm making it, I'm grinding up the beans. I take like a nice long inhale. And I'm like, wait a minute. The beans have been sitting in a container.
Yeah, they're like...
I didn't they've been out. People could have got the Roni on them. It was the one thing I didn't think about. And then I went and was like, coffee. I aerated the Roni and then whiffed the Roni.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like a bacteria sink in the, like a heat sink in your computer. It's like absorbing the air around it constantly. But I think you're okay, man. I hope
so.
Who knows?
I just mean, after taking all these precautions, washing everything, moving, I'm like, wait, I just inhaled a bunch of aerated coffee Roni because what am I supposed to do? Wash the beans individually?
I know. That's what
I don't even know what my solution is now. Yeah. Just to let them sit there for a few days and hope the Roni goes away?
Right. That's what I mean about my cats. And I had a similar experience with you a couple days ago when I was like wiping down my phone with a soapy cloth and my remote controls with like a bleach solution. And I was like, oh, my glasses. I forgot about my glasses. I just, one time I lost my glasses and they were on my face, which is not my proudest moment, but I was bewildered a little bit years ago. I'm better now. But I think these little things that you bring up can like consume you, right? Like, and it's
well, that's the thing, right? It's like you can take all these precautions, and that one place where you didn't, you're like,
yeah,
compromised.
Yeah, and this is a really unique place to be. When you hear smart people like Daryl Morey talk about his team, and he doesn't sleep; he's just obsessed with it. Every single thing, like it's the Billy Bean thing in baseball, no sin bin. And you realize that as a human being, you're so close to inhabiting a space that looks at minutia in a way that is kind of a reverberation chamber, right? It's like, well, there's bacteria everywhere. Everywhere has bacteria. Is my window open? What is this air? And you understand why certain people who are kind of savants at what they do cannot shake these thoughts, right?
Are you saying that coronavirus has become sort of our both civic and individual obsession?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be. Right?
It's all anybody talks about. You turn on the news, you go on Twitter, you talk with your friends, you FaceTime. No one's talking about other stuff.
No, and like it was crazy waking up to. It has been crazy waking up to the news every day, but we've had a rough one today in our own world. Like not only Karl Anthony Towns' mom in that video that dropped last night, like a really cool chef died this morning, Floyd Cardoz. I don't know how to say his last name right, but he was famous for Tabla, which was an Indian restaurant that closed down a long time ago, but has been doing awesome food and been on my TV so much. And like, I love following his career. And I was not thinking about the Bombay Bread Company this morning. And all of a sudden, it's like a heartbreaking story how it just vanished on us.
Well, we're starting to see casualties mount up, and they naturally come from a wide spectrum of victims, as one would suspect with this nature of disease, where Prince Charles is not a casualty, but he has coronavirus, and Karl Anthony Towns' mom is in a coma. And I'm not trying to get too grim here, but we've seen musicians and actors and chefs, as you mentioned, a principal of a school in Brownsville for troubled youth. It is a wide swath, and I'm sure at some point we'll see that the most vulnerable in society are the ones who face the brunt of this, as naturally occurs in every situation. Yeah. But right now we're seeing writers, playwrights, really talented people just felled. And maybe this is a little bit how it felt if you were our age when like the AIDS epidemic was hitting. It just seems like, wow, we knew this was happening, and it feels awful, and like what a toll we are paying immediately.
Yeah. And there's been artwork recently about all of this, like the Avengers, the Infinity Wars, like half the people just disappear, and The Leftovers on HBO, and Survivor's Remorse. All these ideas we've been discussing for years, and when it actually happens, I know it's about AIDS, and I know it's about the heroin epidemic, but when it happens to us like this, it's just like, it feels fucking surreal, man.
Right. We've both known people who have perished because of addiction, and it's happened enough times that we know what that feels like, but it's been spaced out, and this is all at once.
Yep. Yeah. Shout out to my friend Trace Warren from Psychic Ills, who passed away this week. Like, it's just a lot, man.
And according to most experts, this is the beginning stage of the fatalities. And, we're in New York City, which is the hotbed, like the number one coronavirus place in the United States. And we're going to see it spread elsewhere. And this is just the kind of bad news that we're going to have to get used to for a little while.
Yeah. It's wild. Like, you always, your brain goes into a million places all the time, and especially at a time like this. And I always think about the friends and family and the celebrities I love the most. And if the worst thing happened, it would suck. But like having people you're not even thinking about that you like suffer from this is like, it takes some mental fortitude to hold it together and being like, this thing has no thoughts. It has no judgment. It's random. And I just have to accept that.
You had mentioned the idea that, I don't know if it's just Nightmare on Elm Street would be the analog here.
Great movies. Such great movies.
Maybe we'll do a rewatch. But this idea that you see your fears and the ills of society now through the lens of this virus because it is so all-consuming.
Yeah. Like whatever you're thinking about, whatever your fears or emotions are closest to the surface, something like this just brings it out. Whether your concern is politics or the class system, money, racism, this thing unlocks all of that. And people kind of radicalize those thoughts into words and tweets and actions because this thing kind of pushes it right above the surface. And when I say hold it together, I'm just like, we just have to hold it together, man. Your concerns are totally valid, and whatever you're thinking is totally valid, and we have to deal with trauma in individual ways and then as a group. And that process is winding, I think.
If you are a white supremacist hammer, like Stephen Miller, everything looks like a white supremacist nail.
Yeah, this is eugenics, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's being argued right now. How many people can we let die?
Yeah.
Like, who's to blame for this?
Yeah, and I'm sitting here.
How do we cleanse our country of them?
I'm sitting here being like, all these talented, gifted people on Earth are dying, and that's my concern, right? Like these playwrights and these chefs and the mothers of these wonderful basketball players. And she's still, let's hope for the best, and I think it'll be good. But I don't know what's going on, man.
Yeah, I think this does become sort of a neon ribbon that shows the societal ills depending on who you are. Mm-hmm. And, like I'm interested in politics and in wealth inequality and all these other social conditions that you're describing. And because it is such a powerful pandemic, it indicates them all in very easy to identify and decipherable ways.
For sure.
But one thing that just kind of been joked about a bit,
we need jokes.
Which is a rarity, is that Joe Biden died. And the irony, of course, is that it would seem incredibly unfunny if Joe Biden does die. There's a gallows humor to it that is like both completely inappropriate, but is also what makes it funny.
I ran into that problem when Danny Ainge had a health setback. I regret it, but it's funny because it didn't come true.
Right. So if we're cracking jokes and being like, Joe Biden is rolling over in his grave, it's like, no, he is also, I'm making these jokes. He's also very vulnerable to this. He is an 80-year-old man who's around a lot of people, and from his behavior seems disinclined to modify the way he interacts with people.
Something's going on with Joe Biden. We don't know what it is. We can assume, but his behavior has been not like a politician who is going to be the representative of the Democratic Party in a few months.
My thing about Biden right now is that if I had to theorize, because we've seen him on video after a bit of a hiatus in a time when I think we assumed a presidential candidate would be vocal and be reassuring. And he's been shaky. I think, total theory, I think he was exposed to someone with coronavirus because of his sloppiness and unwillingness to change the way he interacts. Giving handshakes, coughing. He doesn't seem to fully grasp the magnitude of how he needs to alter his behavior. I think he's in quarantine, which explains why they couldn't put together video for like 4 or 5 days. Because how do you get Joe Biden to put together a video thing like via instructions over the phone?
Right.
You can't do it.
Right. Yeah. Is this in your theory? Is he being preventative, or do you think he actually has it?
I'm not saying he has coronavirus.
Same difference, kind of.
I'm saying I think in the same way Ted Cruz and people in Congress were exposed to Rand Paul, and went into like self-imposed isolation. I think that Joe Biden came around somebody. I'm not saying he has it, but I think it's a precaution. And they're putting him in a basement away from people and saying, okay, we can't get Joe Biden to crawl beneath the desk and look at the back of the modem to get like the Wi-Fi. We can't do a live broadcast with Joe Biden because we can't get in there. And the only reason this jumped into my mind was because when he was on TV yesterday, and he may have been wearing the same clothes that he was wearing the day before, I'm not sure.
His stylist couldn't get in there, man.
People couldn't get in there.
Yeah.
And he was on TV and he said he coughed just like out into the air, or his hand, I forget. And the host was like,
Jake Tapper, right?
Tapper was like, no, you got to cough into your elbow. That's what we're doing. That's what all the kids are doing these days, you young whippersnapper. And Biden's like, I'm all alone.
Yeah.
How would he be all alone? It actually doesn't make sense.
Well, it makes too much sense in one way, right?
That's all my theory is. I'm not even like trying to roast Joe Biden or say he has coronavirus.
Don't kill Joe Biden.
It just doesn't make sense to say I'm all by myself unless he actually is.
I was hoping your theory would go as far as like, is this a hologram of Joe Biden? Is it not done rendering?
Is this flickering hologram of Joe Biden?
Yeah. Is that Tupac down there with him? They're both holograms. But it was unnerving for me to watch that segment, because if this is one of the two people who will be president of the U.S., I'm like, he cannot even handle being alone and the technology it takes to talk to us, like, or cough the right way. I'm like, as a symbol, he works fine enough. There's horrible symbols that go farther than him, but like on a just basic level, I'm like, oh, these very, very powerful people, potentially the most powerful person on earth, cannot really like navigate this thing because they don't live regular lives, right?
And it's what you said. All these guys are so old.
Yeah.
That it magnifies the difficulty that we were just describing of, man, how do you go to the supermarket? How do you grind up coffee beans without blowing a bunch of Roni into your own face?
Ugh.
Like, how do you go about normal things? And if you're older, the world is already confusing.
Yeah.
You're already struggling to use computers and cell phones and things like that. And now it's like, okay, there's another layer and it could kill you.
The only thing you know how to do is breakdance at D-Nice's party. Biden's here.
Come
yes,
in there
it is
and
me.
give him that thumbs up.
It is me, Joe Biden, breakdancing on this floor.
Hit him with a big yellow thumb. So look, I hope Joe Biden is fine.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that would be my theory to his disappearance. It is just that maybe he was around somebody and they did not take the proper precautions, and they are now.
And to your point, Bernie Sanders virtuously wants to debate another time, because I think we need to hear what our leaders have to say, regardless of where they stand in the polls, and Biden declined.
I wonder if that's going to be acceptable, because if you're the DNC, you don't want another debate because Biden's
right
ahead in the polls. He's winning. You want to say, no, we need to buckle down. Mm-hmm. But also, like, there's no actual good argument against a scheduled debate.
Yeah.
This isn't over yet. There's no good argument if you're the DNC.
My thought was a little bit like, this is a very strange time and we're moving really quickly through the way we feel about it, but maybe a debate about foreign policy and a debate about the economy would be super relevant, but maybe not the right time for it because it's shifting so fast. So to have a debate might be helpful for us. I would definitely watch it, but for them being like, this is kind of a lose-lose situation because it's changing so fast.
I think you can wait until the debate and talk about what's relevant, during this moment, whether they're both up there in agreement or not, and they both say this is what needs to happen, then that's cool. That's the two main contenders for the Democratic nominee unified and saying, here's a plan for going forward, in America in a time of peril. It doesn't need to be, to your point, about like, how are we going to deal with North Korea? It's like that. Okay, we'll shift it towards what's relevant right now, and we know what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair. I mean, these are the guys, right? Like, figure this out, go to battle. There's two basketball teams. You guys have to play the best of 7 because we just need to find out.
I mean, look, I get the front runner's reluctance to
he's dribbling out the
again.
clock.
Yeah, and he did a pretty good job last debate. He held serve. He didn't make any destructive errors. He was Bernie was solid. Biden was pretty good, or at least defied expectations and was like solid. If you're Biden, you're like, I don't want to do that again. As you said, dribble out the clock.
Yeah, you have a lead. Just hold the ball.
I do find it a bit. I don't know. I don't know if it's like ironic, but people's urgency for Bernie to drop out rising as the calls of Biden to show proof of life is a nice weird dynamic. Like, yeah, but is he dead? I don't know, but like Bernie should definitely drop out right now. What are you so worried about?
Do you think, and I'm being sci-fi a little here, do you think eventually, not in our lifetime, but eventually there could be like a hologram president that is an algorithm that figures out what the right thing to do if we plug in data?
Is it the Tupac hologram?
Is it Tupac? Literally Tupac.
Remember, people are too young to remember, but people talked about Tupac was going to end up being the president someday. That was like a talking point.
When?
Like before he died.
Like Juice era? Oh, after Juice. You mean
yeah, when he was kind of at war with Dan Quayle and he was getting more political.
Yeah.
It was pre the rape and pre-death row.
And
it was kind of in that moment.
Pre getting one of his nuts shot off.
Maybe
after. Was it after that?
It was after that, I think. Because he also had that crazy incident where he got in a gunfight with off-duty cops, and I want to say it was in Atlanta, and he won the gun battle, and the charges were dropped.
He lived a wild life, man. He lived a wild life.
All before the age of 24.
Yeah. Like, much more interesting than his counterpart, Biggie Smalls. It was kind of like safe compared to Tupac's life. I mean, Biggie got into his fair share of trouble, but it was like normal racketeering stuff. You read Tupac's Wikipedia and you're like, what?
Yeah, Biggie's issues were like gun possession.
Yeah, like drug dealing.
Yeah, Tupac was really on one. What a theater kid.
He was a theater kid. He was an aspiring actor for a long time.
Total theater kid.
Yeah.
You've seen those clips of him in like Fallen Angel or whatever that documentary was called. He was a theater kid.
It's cool. Where are the people who said The Rock would definitely be president now?
All those celebrity candidates really flamed out.
I know. What's up, Kanye?
Oprah didn't go for it. She's like, no, I got tunnels. The Rock is too busy making Jumanji 7 more Clooney
Jumanjis.
just couldn't be bothered.
Clune Dog. Kanye has his own Taylor Swift beef that he can't overcome.
I don't know. D'Onofrio is still doing a rewatch of Criminal Intent season 9 and realizing that he's only in the first 2 episodes.
He's constantly looking over his shoulder at Goldblum. Nichols coming after him.
In some ways, Nichols was the Somalian pirate that boarded the ship Goran.
Yeah, I think all the detectives from the episode 1 could be Utah Jazz players. Joe Ingles. Greg Ostertag.
Yeah.
Shandon Anderson. Just pair them up.
Brian Russell.
Such a Nichols.
Copland.
Such a Nichols.
You know, speaking of basketball, one of the very few pieces of news we had was that the Sixers ownership was intending on having their employees, seemingly across the board, it was hard to tell exactly, but those who made over a certain threshold were going to give back or relinquish 20% of their pay for the foreseeable future. And
Weird move.
did not read the room well.
Nope.
But it's not as if that ownership group has ever done a good job at reading the room. And they have almost always acted with total impunity. They do things that are awkward. They do things that are ill-advised. They're not particularly honest about their motivations. But in this case, there was widespread rage from the fan base. And then Joel Embiid stepped forward and said, okay, I'll donate $500,000 to these employees. At which point, the team then announced that they would not require their employees to give back 20% of their money. And Embiid thanked them for doing a 180 on Twitter. and Embiid sort of became the hero, but along with the angered fans. And the villains, once again, were the Sixers ownership group.
They were waiting for the stimulus package to form, right? They were waiting to see what that thing was in order to save money. I'm happy they did a 180 like Joel Embiid, but it's hard. It's hard because, you know, that ownership group is rich, and I can't even imagine having anywhere close to as much money as they have. But counting other people's money is something like I just try not to do, because it's endless and frustrating. And, you know, like, I'm grateful for where I am on this earth, you know, and asking for people to go above and beyond is great, but if they do, but it's not my responsibility to pressure them into that. But I'm glad this shook out, and shout out to the bully fans, man.
Well, this falls under the same, you know, classification as a lot of other teams where players stepped up, and they were, of course, greeted with gratitude from fans and the media. And as we said, that's not really the job of the athletes. And they do have the financial resources to help, and I think they should and could help whenever they deem necessary, and that's great. But when we're talking about this NBA ecosystem, you can't ignore the fact that the players are employees, and that the people who employ them have exponentially more money, more resources. So in this case, Embiid making an offer that was really generous also served to shame the guys who have billions of dollars into doing what's right. It's also kind of crazy when you think about it. They tried to save money on that when they sell off second round picks.
Yeah, and it was like
bro, you sell off second round picks for cash.
I think
repeatedly. That just goes into your pocket. It's not salary cap money. You sell second rounders for cash. Okay, sell another second rounder and pay people money with it then.
I think someone did a quick calculation that it would have saved Josh Harris $1.5 million, and they're like, "That's it? You did this for $1.5 million bucks?" But that's a lot of money. Like, lend me 15, lend me 150. But that's a lot of money.
That is indicative, though, of
his point of
someone who has no ability to read the room and no compassion or empathy.
Yeah, it's funny
like to say I'm going to save for our company $1.5 million after getting $1 million for like selling a second round pick. That's just heartless, and it's weird. It's weird to look at it in those ways and say, let's get it out there. 20% less money for our employees. It's weird.
I mean, we always joke like we'll see an amazing end finale to a basketball season and see these two top dog teams fight it out, leave everything on the court, and the first person they hand the trophy to is like some white guy we don't know. Like, who is this guy? And it's usually the owner, who are, you know, less recognizable by face, but own the team. And it's always interesting to see when these owners, these 29 owners and an honorary mention 30th, choose to either be leaders or businessmen. So when they win, they're like, well, it was our vision that carried this team to this championship. But when this stuff like a virus happens, they have to shut down the league. They all turn into business people, which is valid, but it's a jarring kind of framing that keeps on shifting, where all of a sudden Josh Harris is a businessman, which he's always been, but because Joel Embiid showed leadership qualities, then Josh Harris kind of followed suit.
But let's just be clear about the specifics, because I didn't know what that dollar sum was until you just mentioned it.
I believe that's right. I believe I read that.
The Sixers sold the number 57 pick in the June 2019 draft, just last summer, for $2 million.
Yeah.
How do you sell a second-round pick for $2 million and then tell your staff to take less money?
I mean,
that's bullshit.
Chasing hypocrisy is really tough, and that's hypocritical for sure.
I'm not even saying it's hypocritical. I'm not posing it as anything other than almost
ironic.
Not even irony, just like a wild sense of greed.
Yeah,
it's like I'm not even being like, and yet cynically, I'm like, no, you guys are so rich. You just made $2 million off of selling a pick that would have helped the team. And you were like, nah, let's just take the cash and split it up amongst the already billionaire ownership group. Everyone, will get a couple more $100,000? And you're like, nah, we can't, pay these guys. We should slice off some of their money. That's just not reading the room from a PR standpoint, but like almost an unfathomable greed that is, of course, way too familiar.
One time when I first moved to New York City with all my friends from school, we all got jobs and spread out and touched base. And one guy called me and he was like, hey, can I borrow a little bit of money from you? I'm having trouble paying my rent and living expenses. I'm like, yeah, for sure. I have that money to spare. So I met up with him and gave him a stack of 20s. And I looked down and I saw, this is so timely, I saw a pair of Prada shoes on his feet. And, that was a thing back then, those gray ass shoes with the red stripe on the back. And I was like, oh, what's up with those shoes, man? Those cost thousands of dollars. And he's like, well, I got a good deal on them, but I need these because I have to put on airs in my social circle. So if I don't have these, then I'll be ostracized from my community, but thank you for the money. And I was like, at first I was frustrated. And then I got exactly where he was coming from, right? I'm like, him asking me for money wasn't me asking him how he's going to spend it. And that's his business.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, it's also pretty rich.
I mean, I was angry at first, but it quickly came around to if someone in need asks for $5, I hear some people like, he's just going to spend that on alcohol. I'm like, so what? That's not my battle. Like, he asked me for money, or they asked me for money, and I gave it to them, and that's the end of my thought.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that part totally. That if this is your friend and he says they need money, and that's your buddy, the calculus is not how much do they actually need it.
Yes, and it's an easy place to go when we're talking about like Josh Harris and the people who really need support in Wells Fargo Arena, and it's tough because we have to litigate, and this is what politicians do when they make stimulus packages. But like spiritually, as a dude on earth, I'm like, I can't ask you how you're going to spend this money.
Did you ever get your money back?
No.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Because the kind of person who asks for money while wearing Prada sneakers isn't paying you back.
And that's okay because I knew that risk and it happened. And it's okay, I am not as close to that person anymore because of that experience a little bit for a number of things. I don't know. Everyone has kids. Everyone grew up. But I know I wasn't paid back, but I also knew I wouldn't. I was running that risk.
Well, as the saying goes, if you want to get rid of somebody, lend them some money.
Is
proof positive of that adage.
Prada, though. I always laugh. The funniest part of that story, and more interesting, is those damn Prada shoes. That even when they were at their peak, I was like, those can't be real, right? Like, are we really sweating these gray ass shoes with the red stripe in the back? I guess we were.
His argument that I need to put on airs and project a certain
He worked in the fashion business.
Was right, a certain amount of affluence and taste and accessibility to wealth. I understand that because, and I'm not arguing that he is justified. I'm saying that idea of thinking that fake it till you make it is certainly not unique to that industry, but is also very much part of it. I remember just being at a bar and talking with my friend, and his girlfriend was a model, and he's like trying to convince her to buy, a Bentley that's like 7 years old, maybe 15 years old, so she can put it on Instagram. And, it might only cost her like $20,000, but everyone will think that she's like crushing it and driving around in like a $500,000 car because no one can tell that it's like an old used one. And I'm like, cool plan, I guess. I don't know if they went through with it, but he'd put a lot of thought into this. And he was like, she's just got to get a used Bentley.
I love
change everything for her.
I love scam artists. I miss them. I miss going out there in the world. Like, we talk all the time, every day. But I want to meet those weird scam artists that me and you kind of run into randomly. Like, that is the spice of New York life, man.
I'm like, you're not wrong. If you go on Bring a Trailer, you can probably get yourself like a 2010 Bentley with 30,000 miles for $20K.
But why did he want to buy it? Couldn't he just like lease it or like be like, I'll give you $5,000 for a month so I can take all these pictures and then give it back to you?
I know. Just rent it for an afternoon.
Yeah.
Swap out your outfits rampantly, take a bunch of photos and just drop them on Instagram.
Totally.
Over the course of 7 years.
Don't people do that with private jets? Like, can't you rent private jets just for like 5 minutes of photos?
I don't know, but probably.
You got to watch The Tiger King, man.
I watched the first episode of it.
Okay, so you saw the part where they were paying for those photos.
Yeah. What was also funny is that apparently a lot of that older archival footage was shot by the Safdies.
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, I saw Josh on Twitter saying that, or Benny, I'm not sure who was the one actually tweeting, but he had said, I love Joe. We were down there with him shooting because we were thinking about doing something on exotic animal trade.
What? That's awesome.
I don't know which stuff they did, but I think it's the older archival stuff of Joe prior to all these incidents.
That is a sensational documentary. Shout out to Chris Smith, who co-produced that, but he also did one of the Fyre Fest documentaries and American Movie, that amazing movie about that guy making a horror movie. Chris Smith, man. Unsung, but really great at his job.
We've talked a lot about New York City nightlife. Most people don't know who Eric Goode is. If you are, a regular human being and not an idiot. But Eric Goode is the documentarian in Tiger King. He's also the guy behind Area, like one of the most influential and famous nightclubs, sort of art spaces in New York City history.
Right.
He's the owner of the Bowery Hotel and the Jane and Waverly Inn. It's weird that he is this hugely popular and successful like hotelier and restaurateur and nightlife impresario. He's also the documentarian in Tiger King.
So sick. And
awesome. Way to go, dude. Your life is crushing it.
You bring up an interesting point, because I thought about this recently, because in the art, whatever you think the art world is, your circle or the projection of it, like, it's suffering. Galleries are closed, artists are not being able to participate and make money, and if you're in your studio, you're just painting and trying to figure it out. And a lot of criticism, I mean, we touched on this, a lot of criticism from people come down and be like, well, why don't you have a useful skill? Like, it's your fault that you didn't prepare for something like this, which I think is bullshit. But I think when you hear of people who can do this dexterity, who have this dexterity of being like one of the most successful hoteliers on earth, and then be able to make something like Tiger King, it's just incredible. And I think moving forward, I think we are going to see more people like this who cross disciplines.
Love a good multi-hyphenate.
Yeah, it's not quite there, but it's happening soon, I think.
In this time when so many people who are musicians and artists are struggling, it's nice to see at least, one musician succeed. And,
nice?
Great success story. But even more so, I'm talking about this guy. He's a blues guy, a bluesman. He's in a band called JD and the Sure Shot. And he recently, just yesterday, sold the Los Angeles Forum to the Clippers for $400 million. So it's nice to see one of those artsy good guys actually win.
Wow, so he's a songwriter and a businessman. Man.
Shout out to James Dolan. It's nice to see a good guy win.
Woo! The good guys finally win, man. Not like Microsoft and Ballmer just getting hoodwinked by New York City hustlers.
It kind of feels like that, though. Like, oh, you guys aren't involved in the speculative real estate game like New York City?
Yeah.
Watch how this works.
He took Ballmer's lunch. He ate Ballmer's lunch, man. So I think he bought the Forum 8 years ago for roughly $27 million, put roughly $75 million into making it nice, and just held it hostage. And 8 years later, sold it to Ballmer in cash for $400 million. What?
So this would give the Clippers their own stadium, which is something that Ballmer clearly coveted.
Desperately.
And has always felt like a thorn in the side of the Clippers. That they didn't have their own building, that they had to move Lakers shit around and hide banners, and it never felt like their
Change
house.
colors, yeah. Yeah, you walk by Lakers statues to go to a Clippers game.
Why do you think this happens now? Because to your point, Dolan sat on this property for ages. Do you think that Ballmer offered more, or do you think the price came down? Like, what spurred this trade at this very oddly specific moment?
We'll never know, but my assumption was I think Ballmer had a sense of urgency because of Kawhi and Paul George, and he might miss their window for this new arena, maybe definitely, but I think he's like, yo, I'm putting so much into this. I have a contender right now. We need to build this culture. It's just time. And Ballmer is ridiculously wealthy compared to James Dolan. His wealth kind of eats up James Dolan's whole world. And I think the rumor was he dropped, this is just a weird rumor, he dropped the cash in a suitcase and called Dolan poor and like kind of dropped the mic on him, which is such a flex that I don't even understand. I mean, Dolan is one of the richest people in New York, and he doesn't even come close to Ballmer.
Yeah, I wonder if the timing was based on Dolan accepting less money or Ballmer just being bored, or there being, as you said, urgency towards figuring this out down the line. It was just a peculiar time for it to occur. But maybe it would have happened anyway. Maybe negotiations were ongoing even before the season was suspended indefinitely.
How does Dolan launder that money? Because there's no way he's declaring all that cash. And we know about it. So how does he do it? What would you do?
JD and the Sure Shot Tour. Buy tickets.
Wait, they're going to make holograms?
Sell out your own arenas.
JD hologram that lives forever, that writes songs based off of algorithms of what's happening in the news? That costs $400 million.
At least $400 million.
Yeah, you can write that
Maybe
off.
more.
That's a write-off.
One thing I've enjoyed about having no basketball to speak about is that we've kind of gone back in time and addressed sort of players from the past that were intriguing or unfairly maligned or rated in a way that seems unfair today. Whatever. Yeah. Just reassessing players of the past. And we did that kind of with Allen Houston and Mookie Blaylock. And one guy that
Charlie Ward.
We really described that king. Charlie Ward.
Best friend. JC.
Jesus. One guy that we both were sort of interested in, and we did not do a lot of research, I'm going to be frank, but Derrick Coleman, because he was seen as the poster boy for the malcontent privileged, babyish, whining, lazy athlete of the late 90s. And knowing what conventional wisdom thought about him and thinking about that era and how Allen Iverson was treated and the so-called jailblazers were treated and how an old guard of sports writers still dominated the creation of narratives around, in particular, young black athletes, I wanted to think back about Derrick Coleman a bit. Because, again, he was viewed as the archetype of the bad athlete. Looking back at DC, what do you think of him now?
Well, I mean, before he was looked at as one of the original bad boys, or the lineage of bad boys, he was the original unicorn, right? Because I believe he won a championship in Syracuse. I think.
No,
right?
He did not win a championship, but as a freshman, he went to the finals. And Indiana beat them with a baseline jumper from, what was his name? Kenneth Smart, something Smart.
Jesus.
Keith Smart.
Keith Smart.
Yep.
I thought Keith Smart was North Carolina, no?
No, he was Indiana.
I'm thinking of Kevin Bogans, my bad.
And then no relation to the investigator, Goran, from Criminal Intent Season 9, Episode 1, Loyalty, Part 1.
Which is what this pod is, rewatch of Episode 1 of Season 9 of Law & Order Criminal Intent. But he was the unicorn, right? Derrick Coleman was the big who could wander outside the arc, drop a three. He had range. He could shoot from the foul line. He was almost in that era. I mean, his rookie year was 91. The archetype for the evolution of the big man. He was mobile. He could pass a little bit. Bona fide number one pick. I remember I collected basketball cards. As an aside, Ben, this is fucking weird. I spent all last night watching basketball card unpacking on YouTube.
It's getting pretty close to the god. Steve 1.
Yes.
Steve 1. Just because when I type it in, I only have to type in Steve 1, and then it immediately comes up, and I'm like, there he is.
Nice.
The king.
Nice.
Steve 1989. To me, it's Steve 1.
My browser knows. Yeah. Yo, I was watching unpacking of expensive basketball card packs, and I was enthralled for like a good hour and a half. I was like, are you going to get a Zion? Yes. It was very satisfying. But anyway, when I was a young buck like Joe Biden and basketball cards were hot like Joe Biden's policy, I really coveted that NBA Hoops Derrick Coleman rookie card. It was like this beautiful card that there was millions of that every kid had, but it's just ingrained on my memory. And why that was is he was such like a special player that captured your imagination because he kind of transformed what you thought a big man can do. He moved like a guard a little bit. He was fluid. He was cool. And he was seen as a disappointment because he didn't come through on his promise for boomers. I thought he was fantastic, but he was seen as lazy because he said some scandalous stuff.
Looking at the conventional wisdom and those key phrases that we now regard with a lot of skepticism, wanting it more, things about practice, taking it seriously.
Championship jeans.
I kind of look at those now. I'm like, there's probably some other shit.
Yeah, always.
I'm like, it wasn't that, because those things are wrong most of the time. Yeah. And look, maybe Derrick Coleman didn't want it in the way that Kobe Bryant wanted it, in this boomer-ass equation of wanting it more, like this sliding scale of desire. But Derrick Coleman was ridiculously good his first 4 or 5 years in the league. Then he got hurt, then he wasn't good. That, to me, is not a coincidence, especially considering when he played. You go back and look at how his game fell apart. It really did change.
He was a great player on the Nets, a great, great player. And then he got hurt, and he went to Philly, and he wasn't the same. He had one very bad season where he only played 11 games. But after that, injury prone, kind of a net zero, sort of like your favorite player on earth, Tobias Harris.
Yeah, when he was in Jersey, he was a pillar of what was regarded as one of the most exciting up-and-coming teams in the NBA, and they were really cool because you had Kenny Anderson, who was a Queens-bred phenomenon basketball player who
So
went to Georgia
awesome.
Tech. Gnarly, just gnarly.
Super
he
fun.
was Kyrie, he was Kemba. If you're too young to remember Kenny Anderson, that was what he was. He was Kemba, that New York City point guard who would like shake you to the ground. He could score, he could pass. He was a monster.
Swagger.
He was actually from Jersey, though. I take that back, Jersey City. And then you look at Derrick Coleman, who was this, incredibly diverse skill set. He could shoot from deep. As a rookie, he shot, 34% from three.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty good passer for his size. He was kind of a basketball genius in a lot of ways. And then you had Drazen Petrovic,
Yes.
who was kind of one of the earliest sort of Euro scoring dynamos. And for that time period before we valued threes, he was an incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an incredibly futuristic scoring force at an era that was at this point prehistoric.
That was a really exciting team, man. Johnny
And-
Newman.
And the spoiler here is that he was killed in a car accident on the Autobahn.
That's right. Which is tragic. And that 30 for 30 with Vladi is such an intense documentary. But, Jason Williams was on that team. That was a good team. What an odd team. Whoa, a lot of stories there.
Right. So when you look at the trajectory of Coleman's career and you see where his decline starts, it happened after an injury. He played 54 games in the 95 season. As you mentioned, he played 11 games in the 96 season. And then after that, he missed tons and tons of games over the next 3 years. He missed, he only played in the 99 season. He only played 29 games.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the end of his career.
Wait, what are you looking at? I see 37.
I'm sorry, 37 games, sorry.
Yeah, totally. And he was known as an injured player, and we slap on all these assumptions onto injured or depressed players in the league. Like, as you said, they don't want it enough. They're an example of a new generation that doesn't care as much as I cared. The truth is, he was derailed probably by a lot of sadness and a lot of injury.
Whether he was sad or not, I don't know, but he was definitely injury prone.
Yeah.
And there's still some odd stigma where people view players who suffer injuries as not wanting it enough. And that happened with Andrew Bynum. People were so mad at him for not playing. Oh my God. The guy had 2 broken knees.
Yeah.
He never played again, really.
Yeah. Haircut legend, though.
I mean,
What a haircut.
Sixers fans still are mad at Andrew Bynum. I'm like, why?
Because, right, but it set in motion such great years for the Sixers. But yeah, the Sixers paid a high price for him, and he never,
I get people being disappointed by the trade,
This
but
is
they
some
were
Nick
acting
Nash
like,
shit.
he wouldn't play.
Right.
He hasn't been in the NBA in years, and he's only 32 years old.
God, he's only 32 currently.
It's crazy.
He skipped college, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh,
I think he was he was the youngest player in the league, I believe, when the Lakers drafted him.
He was a
He's
beast.
only
He was
32
good.
years old now. He's been out of the league essentially since he left the Lakers.
Wow.
Like, it's time to forgive Andrew Bynum, guys. He is a victim, not not the villain.
He's also a bona fide success. Like, to view him as a failure is just too subjective. It's just like, well, he didn't come through in Philly, but what a player. Like, he was awesome.
And I would say, if you look back at Derrick Coleman, and he did not get hurt, and we toss aside the perceptions about his saying whoop-de-damn-do about his teammate missing practice, or him calling Karl Malone a Uncle Tom. If we get rid of the perception of him as a angry malcontent who didn't try, and you just view his career through the lens of injuries, we were probably robbed of watching a Hall of Fame player.
Absolutely.
Who could have been an important player on a championship contender had he been able to remain healthy. Like, let's not villainize him as the symbol for like the shitty modern athlete. Also, that was like 20 some years ago.
I know. Well,
And people are still saying the same stuff.
Can we talk about the 97 Sixers? That team was kind of weird, right? They were, no pun intended, stacked. So, I'm sorry. That was awful.
I expect no less. I really enjoyed that team as a young Sixers enthusiast because I wanted Stackhouse the year before in the draft and was so excited that they got Jerry Stackhouse. I liked Derrick Coleman as someone who rooted for Syracuse. And then they got Allen Iverson, who was the coolest player on the planet. Even though he played for Georgetown, he was still the coolest player on the planet. I loved that team.
And it was the first year of the NBA. It all came together.
It was amazing to see the sport emerge as, a professional sport with professional athletes.
Right.
And have Allen Iverson, Derrick Coleman, and Jerry Stackhouse. Like, that was a cool triumvirate. I remember playing video games at that time. That team was cool when you were playing on I don't know, whatever that was. What game was that even? But whatever it was.
NBA Live, maybe.
Yeah, whatever it was, those teams were fun to play with.
Yeah. Yeah, just an aside. Those games were so hackable because the players like Ray Allen and Vince Carter were just unbeatable. Anyway, like Allen Houston was unbeatable.
Actually, let's talk about that for a second. Because
simulation going wrong.
Or going right. Because it turns out that when you have a zillion different people playing the game and experimenting with different strategies on what works the best, it ends up coming to the very natural conclusion that people draw later. The same way that when you were playing Madden football and you always went for it on fourth down. Eventually the math caught up to professional NFL coaches. You guys should be going for it more on fourth down.
Yeah, there's
or in video games, to your point, when you would get someone who could shoot and your entire offense was just chucking up threes with Ray Allen and you could just blow people out with like Lamont Murray.
Yeah.
Like, that was actually what happened to basketball.
In a way, right? Because if you were writing this program, making these algorithms about how these players should perform, you have to start packaging attributes. So let's say Allen Iverson, best shooter, whatever. As a video game, you want Allen Iverson to be good, but you got to be like, he's kind of small, so you can kind of bully him around. So maybe he's not good on defense. And the exact opposite for a Patrick Ewing. But then you get to the tweeners, the wings, like Ray Allen on the Bucks, and you're like, well, I can't really give him a weakness because he's not a perfect player, but in the video game simulation, he has no weaknesses. He's big enough where he doesn't get bodied. He shoots amazing. He can rebound and he can pass. And you're like, as a player, I'm like, just give me one of those players and I'll just destroy.
Well, it's 100% because they have to use math. And they say, okay, well, if you have Ray Allen, he's going to make 38% or 40% of the threes he takes.
Yeah.
And that's just how it's got to be because that's what he shoots.
Yeah, he's known as that, right?
They're not necessarily at that point in video game history acknowledging usage.
Right.
Where you could take a player who shot 7 threes in the NBA game, which would have been a ton for that time. I don't even know what Ray Allen was shooting. And you say, well, I'm going to take 30 threes with him and I'm going to turn off fatigue. And now we're looking at the modern NBA.
Right. And
he's still got to shoot 40% because that's how it was written into the code.
Right. And the interesting thing is like, a player like Klay Thompson would do great in 1997 NBA Live. Like,
here we go.
I mean, they adjusted, so he has issues in 2020 video games. But back then, it was such a kind of primitive way to create like a resimulation of this game, whatever. And there was no choice but to kind of give Klay Thompson the things a user would expect from him, and he would just be even more useful than Steph Curry in that game.
That makes sense. I don't know. I'm still hung up on this idea that because you have so many people playing so many games, it's in the way of, in literal simulations, that you end up coming up with the best strategies to win. In the same way, say, I guess a chess program looks at all the permutations of their next move and comes out with the one that's most likely to lead to success.
Right.
And instead you're like, okay, we've got 3 million people playing this video game every day, 10 games. We're generating hundreds of millions of simulations. Data points. And like, what works? And it's like taking a shit ton of threes and trying to dunk.
I mean, video game companies surely are mining behavior on complicated games in the way we think about things, and, you know, applying that to selling us stuff or like retail, you know, like really dumb ways. But you're right. If I was the NBA, I would call up a video game company being like, how much does it cost for you to give us like 4 years of player data?
The problem is, and I agree they should be doing that, and hopefully they are, because it's just more information. Like, there's going to be some functionality to it.
Oh, yeah.
The problem now is that, or maybe it's not a problem, but the video game companies are now so attuned to the game itself that they're basing it on the NBA in such a literal way to make the game
Right.
feel and reflect it in terms of statistics and probabilities and fatigue and defense and turnovers and passing in a way that the prior ones probably were ignoring because they didn't have the capabilities at that point. But your point is still true. Even with all those realities sort of baked in, let's find the anomalies.
Yeah.
What's weird and what's working? What's feels like cheesing in a video game in 2020 that if you're Daryl Morey, you're like, oh, no center, eh?
Yeah.
So everyone's just taking out Capella and putting PJ Tucker there,
Yeah.
and having Westbrook go at Gobert.
It's like, can I ask you guys why you took out Capella? And they're like, too slow. And it's like, oh, right. It's like, yeah, I'm trying to shoot more because I'm always behind by 12 points. So he's too slow. I need to put another shooter on the court. I'm like, right.
It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, especially when the NBA has been suspended. Like, you know, people have been throwing around, us included, the idea maybe we could simulate this out on a video game and we can all watch and have all these computer programs just play out the rest of the season based off of how they created these guys. But where you got to an very interesting point is like how much of that architecture is mimicking what they see in reality or projecting what they want to see in reality.
Absolutely.
That's cool. That's a cool thought.
Right. And if it is now created to mimic modern basketball down to the most small minutia, those little places where people have found edges could be even more valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you thought about getting into gaming
Yeah.
in this time of housebound boredom?
I think the Nintendo handhelds are all sold out, but I have thought about it, and I think we've talked about it recently. I have a very addictive personality with video games.
We
That
did
is
talk about
scary.
this. Yeah.
I get into some big trouble, and I have deadlines. Thankfully, I am very grateful to have deadlines, and I have a life that I quite like. So introducing video games would definitely be a challenge.
I think that it makes more sense for most people to try to be a little more productive. And I don't mean that in a judgy way, like kill the time however you have to. But to your point, inserting a time gobbling device like an Xbox or PlayStation might not be the wisest way to spend the next couple months, but I'm also not being judgy about it.
So cool. I love it.
I haven't gamed in such a long time that, you know, I was like, well, do I get an Xbox or a PlayStation? I'll simply Google to find out. I'm like, oh, this is an insane war that's been going on for like a decade.
Yeah.
And like, I've been completely oblivious to this struggle. I've been in my, odd little matrix pod as the red and blue pillars have been fighting over Xbox versus PlayStation 4 or whatever it is.
And Nintendo. I'm a more Nintendo guy because I love like the soft, like round quality of it, and I like their brands more. I like Mario Kart. I really want to play that Mario battle game where like all these characters fight each other on a platform. I like Luigi's Castle. I want to play. Landry Shamet is the villain in that, so I'd like to see him cross platforms too.
I was like, wait, maybe I can just go online and find myself a nice
Luigi's Mansion.
Nintendo emulator. So I tried to play Castlevania on it.
You 8-bit Castlevania, the old one.
The old one on a free emulator, like some website.
It's a cool game.
And I was trying to play Castlevania with the arrow buttons and like the X and Z, and I'm like, this is terrible, and I can't do it. I gave up immediately.
You can order a USB controller. It might be a more fun experience.
Get back to my boomer ass Mega Man games.
Mega Man's hard, man. That's a difficult game. But you brought up something like, how do we fill time? Recently, I've been giving myself deadlines on the clock because I think the thing I miss is urgency. Like in our lives before, it's like, well, I got to get this done so I can meet somebody, or I have to get this done so I could, get to sleep early and wake up so I can do something else. And I miss that part of my life when we're all stuck at home and kind of everything is slowing down a little bit. So I've been giving myself, like, if I don't get my workout in before 2, then I'm in trouble. So I'll get on my bike at like 2:30 and try to 1:30 and squeeze it in. It's like fake urgency in my life has been helpful. Have you broached any of that stuff?
No, but I get it because, in Criminal Intent, Season 9, Episode 1.
Which is what this podcast is about.
Yeah, you see the way that our detectives, go around and
Nichols
and the rest of the crew, they respond to a Somali...
You're such a Goran.
Goran Dragic. They respond to, a Somali pirate, attacking a powerful sheik with a sense of urgency that I think is missing from my daily schedule.
What will episode 2 hold?
Loyalty? Part 2? More loyalties?
A lot of rapping, a lot of rhyming on that episode.
Is it more, in your opinion, a Mobb Deep loyalty vibe, or is it Kendrick Lamar, the singer-rapper who made the song Loyalty?
Definitely Mobb Deep, only because Vincent D'Onofrio is the 90s king, right?
Yeah.
He's Full Metal Jacket, one of the most memorable actors of our Gen X generation, man.
Played that serial killer who was like in a coma, and then
in the Cell?
J-Lo had to go into his brain. Is that what happened?
The Cell was an awesome movie. I think I forgot who the coolest name of the director. I forgot his name. It's not McG, but it's like Tarsem or something. Tarsem? That was a cool movie. A lot of contemporary art references. A lot of Damien Hirst action going on in that movie.
Tarsem Singh was the director of The Cell.
Classic Tarsem.
That is Hard Body 2000 right there. Mm-hmm. Like huge Millennium Bug vibes.
Yeah. Who is the Tarsem in the NBA now? Would it be Josh Richardson?
He's very 2000.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. The classic, Millennium wet noodle.
Like a cooked linguine.
I'm going to watch The Cell. Now I'm excited for it.
Oh, yeah. I think I have a VHS tape of that somewhere in my house.
It was very artful.
Oh, man. It was like the whole thing was like Matthew Barney, Damien Hirst, like lambs splitting into different formaldehyde chambers.
YouTube has it for $3.
Wait. I am so old. I didn't know YouTube could charge for licensed movies for $3.
Yeah. They rent them out just like Amazon does, or Google Play, or iTunes.
Do you watch on your laptop or do you throw it on your screen?
A little of both.
How's the resolution on the screen? I'm so old. I don't do this.
Well, for like a NBA game, if I was going to illegally stream it on my
If you were considering,
laptop. If that was something that I would ever do,
which you would,
the streaming is pretty much fine. I've heard.
the streets say. They say the streaming looks fine.
Yeah, sometimes it'll glitch. They say.
Right. Do you pick the Ala Abdel Nabi feed that some people might find egregious? Or do you go for the Sixers away games like some other people might do?
Oh, I always go Allah because I need to confer with the interns and make sure that when they quote him, they're being accurate.
Do the interns rattle their cage to remind you, to give them the information? Because they can't see the TV. They're just staring into the abyss.
I got to be honest, man. When are the interns going to get their gruel bell out?
They're gonna
I
get.
hear them.
Yeah.
They've been howling day and night for their bailout, and I'm like, I don't know, man. It's challenging times.
They're gonna get a one-time portion, a small portion of gruel, and figure it out from there because it's a dog-eat-dog world, baby.
Like, look, if they are able to garner public sympathy, and we start being shamed for giving them more or less gruel, perhaps. Then we'll change our policy. We'll do a 180, and they'll get the less gruel that they demand.
Pandemic be damned. They got to pay rent on that cage, man. The first is coming up.
Freeze cage rentals. This has been an exciting episode.
Of the Law and Order podcast. Criminal Intent Rewatched.
Season 9, Episode 1. Next week. Episode 2. Loyalty. Episode 2. Loyalties.
Cookies.